Hey everybody, today I want to talk about labor forecasting because let's face it, every restaurant, one of their biggest expenses is labor. And after an hour goes by, if it's slow, you can't go back and say, hey, Billy, I'm not going to pay you for that shift because it was slow. No, as soon as an hour goes by, you're out that money. There's nothing else you can do, right? So what we want to make sure is that we are staffing properly for the intended volume or the suspected volume that's going to be coming in. Now, most people are going to say, how can I possibly predict that? How can I possibly predict what's going to happen? I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen. So there's a few tools that we can use. Now, for our clients, we actually have a whole tool. We have a 12-week people plan, and we look at, okay, what are the expected sales over the next 3 months? How are we going to make sure we have both enough staff? How are we going to be staffed properly? And then most importantly, how are we going to be on target for our labor budget? Right? Because at the end of the day, say you're doing, $1 million in sales a year. Well, 1% of $1 million is $10,000, right? It is a significant amount of money. So we want to make sure that we are on track for all of those things. Because most of us think, oh, my labor's over 3%, not a big deal. Oh, that's $30,000. You just said, oh, not a big deal to $30,000. What could you do with $30,000? I can bet there's a few things you would do with that. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure we're tight on our costs, and labor forecasting is one of the best ways to do it. So without using any fancy tools, there are tools out there, and we teach our clients to use them as well. But one of the easiest ways, like on the back of a napkin that you can do, you can look at two factors. The first factor that you want to look at is the month that you're in and that same week the previous year. Because as we know, restaurants are cyclical, seasonal businesses. So say, for example, when you're in Arizona, all of a sudden, you're going to start getting busier in February, in March. That's going to be your peak season. Whereas somewhere in Canada is going to be May and June might be your peak season there, right? So you're going to know for your restaurant where the peak seasons are for you and where the slow seasons are. Because guess what? Once you've gone through a year, you have a rough idea of where things are trending, right? So you're going to know that, okay, in my particular business, I know that May is going to be approximately 35% better than February. So I know that all of a sudden my sales are going to go up. So my average expected weekly sales are going to be this versus this. So when I'm doing my planning in January and February, I know that we're going to need to hire more people. I know that we're going to need to staff more people based on those changes. And so realistically, you can actually look ahead for that. So that's the first thing you want to do, is take a look at what happened last year. Once you have that data, that is a great starting point. So you roughly have an idea. So say, as I'm filming this, it's April right now. So say we're looking at our next few weeks in April. I'll look and say, okay, what were the average sales per week during April? How does that stack up? Okay, that's number one. The second thing you will do is you can actually take a look at what happened last month. Okay, so again, it's April right now. I'd take a look at March, and I would compare March of this year that we just passed and the previous year. And I would say, okay, what is our trend? Because the trend line is something that you want to really start factoring in. So all of a sudden, if our sales are naturally 20%, if our March was 20% above last year's March, we're on a 20% upward trend. What we then need to do is take our expected sales from April from last year and then add 20% to that. So that's going to give us a more accurate forecast. Now, the other thing you want to factor in as well is what happened last week. Because last week will give you, as far as an hourly perspective, will probably give you some of the most insightful data. But then you take that and you say, okay, based on what happened last week, we were here, and I know based on what's happening, we are likely to go up based on last year's sales and based on the trend. So we are likely to go up. Okay, what are each individual day's sales? We can take a look at that from the last year, then use our trend along that line. We also know how the holidays affect us. Have you guys ever staffed for a holiday and then been like, oh my God, how did I not realize it was going to be so busy or so slow? And then you look at last year and you realize that the same thing happened last year, right? So a lot of things are very, very cyclical. Now you can't predict what hour necessarily someone is going to, like, you don't know if you're going to get a rush at a certain time or, be dead at another time. But what you can use is your averages to start staffing that out. Now, there's a couple other things that you can do on a day-to-day basis that will really help. Number one is weather forecast, because people are like if it's rainy, snowy, sunny, those are going to mean different things for your demographic. So I know on a sunny day, we are likely to get hit at a different time than if it was a rainy day. On a rainy day, I know we're going to get more Uber orders and DoorDash orders and stuff like that. But on a sunny day, I know it's going to impact our sales differently. If it's a beautiful weekend, I know that we are going to be busier, but if it's a really nice long weekend, we're actually going to be slower. I know these things because I've experienced it and I've went through it before. And so what you got to do is actually look at what's upcoming, look at your weather, look at your holidays, and say, okay, so looking like a great weather forecast, I know that sales are going to be a little bit better. So my average is this, so I know roughly what it should be, but you know what? I'm going to staff up a little bit. So if I had the choice of between saying staffing like 6 people or 5, I'm going to opt for the 6 because I know, hey, we are likely to be busier. But if I know that all of a sudden for us fall is a downturn, so if I know in the fall our sales tend to trend down, I'm going to say the average is this, but you know what? I'm going to staff a little bit under that because it could be slower. Right? I'm just making these micro decisions as I go, knowing the trend that we're on, knowing the season that we're in, knowing the month that we're in, and what those volumes are. And so those are really, really crucial things. Now, I know this sounds like a lot of stuff to do. We do have a tool that we use with our clients to be able to navigate all of this, but just, as you experience it, as you go through it, as you look at the data points, you can start making those changes. Now, the other thing that I will say as well is that they say that the best battle plan never meets or never survives first contact with the enemy, I think is the saying. So when it actually happens, a couple of things need to happen on a day-to-day basis. So what needs to happen is that we also need to adapt our day-to-day scheduling as it's happening. So for example, I have it literally built into all of our checklists at, after lunch, we go back and review our hourly sales. We have a productivity calculator where we calculate our expected, person hour usage versus what we feel is attainable. Is it slow? Is it busier? Whatever the case is. So we look at that. We say, hey, it was definitely slower today. So therefore, we're going to start sending Sally home an hour earlier. We're going to, send someone home a little bit earlier, whatever the case might be. Or if it's busier, we're doing the opposite. We're saying, hey, can you stay an extra hour? Can you stay an extra 30 minutes? Can we call someone in a little bit earlier tonight to help clear things up? And so we're adjusting our labor on the fly as we go. So usually it is not even our managers or supervisors that are doing this, but our frontline crew. We've trained them to be able to do this in my business on a day-to-day basis. So that's something that they just expect, and they know that that's what they have to do, and they're just used to it. We train them like that from day one, and it works out extremely well for us. Now, on a management perspective, we then do a midweek labor check. So we do this on Thursdays from Monday to Wednesday, and we know the proportion of labor we should have used on those days versus sales. And so we know, okay, we're coming in on target, or hey, we are off track, so therefore we need to make some scheduling changes for the weekend just to make sure we end up on track at the end of the week. And then on Mondays, we do a full review of the previous week with our food cost, our labor cost, making sure that we're on track. So all of these things put together, number one, you need to know where you're going, what to anticipate, whether there's holidays, weather, all of those little things might affect you. So again, we want to take a look at our last year's sales, our current trend, and then anything that we can ascertain about the future of what's going to happen over the next week or 2 weeks or whatever the case is. Second piece, we need to make sure we're ready to be nimble every day, making the adjustments as they happen. And number 3, we need to midweek check in and at the end of the week evaluate our labor costs. And what so many people do is they either don't change their schedule based on the sales. I've seen that way too much. Or they wait until they get their profit and loss statement in at the end of the month, and then they go, oh man, we were over in labor. What are we going to do about that? But then by the time you make the changes, by the time you get the reporting, all of a sudden you're 6 weeks after the fact. And by then it's too late. So we do it weekly so that we can stay on top of our trends to make sure that we're always on target with our food and our labor costs. So I hope this helps. If you have questions, happy to answer them. It is not a perfect scenario, but you get a lot more clarity and a lot more control with your labor once you start using the data that you have available to you and start making these educated decisions. And trust me, your business will never be the same ever again once you take control of that. All right. Bye.